Hey all, so I picked up this beautiful DW kit just about a year ago. This is the first time I've ever owned a collector's kit. I wanted to share with you some tips that might help others who might be looking to make that switch to DW. These are all things that I wish I had known from day one. First up, I wish I had added some extra bass drum hoop protectors to the kit right away. DW, they shipped it with just a small piece that's intended to go on the inside of the hoop to protect it from the pedal, but they don't ship it with an underside piece. And after just 2 or 3 times of mounting and unmounting the bass drum, the paint job underneath the hoop got ripped off. Next up, let's talk about the drum heads a little bit. On the snare, it shipped with DW's snare batter head, basically like a Remo Ambassador. And I wanted to give it a real go, but I decided that I thought that the regular Ambassadors or the Evans G1s, that those were a lot better. I felt that the coating on the DW snare, it was very thin, very light, and it wore off very quickly, and I didn't like the sound of it as much. Speaking of drum heads, and this is at least the case on the snare, I found that the Evans head fit better than the Remo. The Remo was maybe either too narrow or just too tight on the shell, and it just didn't quite fit on there. And I've noticed a similar sort of thing on the toms with the Remo heads, but I've not tried Evans there yet. Those Remo heads are so tight, I actually damaged one of my toms with it. The tom head was not on straight, so I just went to rotate the drum head and it felt a little too tight, took it off, and I noticed that the metal section on the drum head actually gouged out part of the finish. I never used Evans heads before coming to DW, but if you have not used Evans and you're switching to DW, definitely give the Evans head a look because I think they're going to fit on better. I haven't seen the same sort of thing on my old Pearls. Maybe it's actually the case that the DW shells are just a little bit wider. In any case though, the Evans do seem to fit better. I mentioned the finish earlier. By the way, it's Mapa Burl with a deep, rich red burst and black nickel hardware. One thing I wasn't expecting is to be so obsessive over making sure there wasn't dust and all this stuff on there. So DW actually shipped it with this suede opera fiber cloth, which at the time I was like, oh, I'll never use that. But now, every single time I kind of tune the drums up a little bit, I just give it a quick, not thorough, but I give them all a quick wipe down. And that was something I wasn't really expecting. So I had to actually go find where I had put the cloth. So keep that thing handy when you get your DWs. Also, I wasn't expecting that I was going to be kind of tuning the drums up so much. One thing you might want to do is maybe over tune the drums just a little bit from where you want, because they might settle in a bit once you start to bang on them. Let's talk about hardware and mounting for a second. So coming from a set of Pearls, which we're not using the kind of newer L-arm style, right? It's just got that pipe that goes straight in. The mounting, the thought process on it is very different. And I was having some difficulty early on just getting the drums in just the right place. Now that I've gotten used to it and I understand it, I actually like the mounting on the DWs a lot more than my old Pearls. I think one of the really key things is understanding that you can take the drum and just rotate it quite a bit from the point of the L-arm, right? So before I was just taking the whole clamp with the drum on it and just trying to rotate the whole thing back and forth. But you could basically angle the clamp one way and then rotate the drum on the L-arm in the opposite direction. And doing something like this can help avoid, the DW's got those big pieces of hardware, and you want to avoid having those line up, because then you can get the drums closer together. Now, when I was first trying to mount these up, I had bought some of the single tom mounts. I also had bought a double tom mount and learned very quickly that the double tom mount was not going to cut it for me. There's really 2 issues that I see with that, at least when you're trying to do this on a rack. The double tom mount puts the drums off to the sides instead of towards you. So you don't have as much reach when you're using the double tom mount. Also, I was finding that when I had 2 drums on there, I was like having to sacrifice the position of one to favor the other. So that was a bit of a wasted purchase on my part when I had bought the double tom mount. I definitely recommend going just with the singles, especially if you're using a rack. Another important part on trying to get the drums in the right place was making sure you have basically dedicated downpipes. You can mount these to a cymbal stand, but again, you're kind of tied into the position of the cymbal stand, and you don't want to sacrifice the position of one to another, so you want some dedicated downpipes. For me, this actually meant kind of learning how to use a pipe cutter. I had some older stands that were a little bit too long anyhow, and just so I used the pipe cutter to cut off like a 7 or 8 inch section, which I just mounted that little piece onto the rack, and now I didn't have to be dependent on my cymbal stands. Finally, let's just talk about snare sensitivity. You know, my drums are all different woods. The bass drum is Purplecore maple and the toms are cherry mahogany. My snare is a pure Purpleheart. It's way more sensitive than my previous snare. My old snare is a DW, but I think it was a Keller shell. It's a 6+10 or 10+6. This new snare, the Purpleheart, is way more sensitive. And in a sense, that's great, right? But just all of the competing frequencies of the sympathetic resonance from the toms, I've been just spending a lot of time trying to work out the tuning between them. Let's just say I anticipated a few hours, and it's been a few dozen hours probably, just trying to get everything just so. So I hope that helps anyone out there who's looking to make the dive into a DW kit. If you're interested in other stuff like cymbal reviews, stick reviews, lessons, recording tips, I am putting out the whole gambit of drum related content all the time. So if you don't want to miss out, then don't forget to subscribe. Until next time, peace.